The sky over Willow Creek, Tennessee, had turned a sickly shade of gray, the kind that promised no mercy. For 3 days, rain hammered the small town, relentless, as if the heavens had decided to drown every inch of the county. Winds howled at 80 miles an hour, ripping century-old maples from their roots and snapping power lines like brittle twigs. By the second night, half of Willow Creek sat in darkness, the hum of electricity replaced by the eerie wail of the storm. Roads morphed into muddy rivers or were blocked by fallen trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the asphalt. Cell towers, silenced by the onslaught, left the town cut off from the outside world. It was the worst disaster Willow Creek had faced since the flood of '72, and the weight of it pressed down on every soul in the county. Ambulances stalled in flooded intersections, their sirens swallowed by the wind. The local hospital, running on a flickering backup generator, sent out desperate radio calls. Patients needed insulin, oxygen, dialysis, but no supplies could get through. The nursing home on Pine Street was down to its last day of medication. Firefighters, drenched and exhausted, fought to clear debris, but every road out of town was a dead end. The National Guard was hours away, if they could even make it. In the chaos, the people of Willow Creek turned to their emergency management team, hoping for a lifeline. But the truth was stark. They were trapped, and time was running out. On the outskirts of town, in a weathered farmhouse perched on a low hill, Samuel "Sam" Tucker stood on his creaking porch, staring out at the deluge. At 68, Sam was a man of few words, his face carved by decades of sun and wind, his hands calloused from years of working the land. His denim jacket hung loose on his lean frame, and his boots, caked with mud, bore the scars of countless seasons. Since his wife Clara passed 2 years ago, Sam had kept to himself, tending his soybean fields on the old Grayson property. To most, he was just the quiet farmer who nodded politely at the feed store, his life as unremarkable as the dirt under his nails. But Sam Tucker was no stranger to storms, literal or otherwise. He'd seen enough of them to know when nature was flexing its muscle, reminding humanity who was really in charge. Inside his barn, Sam had prepared for the worst, as he always did. His generator purred, fully fueled. His pantry was stocked with enough canned goods to last a month. His Chevy pickup, a '79 model that had outlasted most of its peers, sat ready with a full tank and a coil of heavy chain in the bed. Sam didn't trust fate to be kind. He'd learned that lesson long ago. As he watched the rain lash his fields, he sipped black coffee from a chipped mug, his sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon. The storm wasn't just a weather event. It was a test, and Sam Tucker had never failed a test. By noon, the county emergency team called a meeting at Willow Creek High School, the only building with a working generator. The gymnasium buzzed with anxious voices as townfolk packed the bleachers, their faces drawn with worry. Sam drove up in his mud-splattered truck, parking at the edge of the lot. He slipped inside, his presence barely noticed, and leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, his worn cap pulled low. The crowd was a mix of farmers, shopkeepers, and retirees, all clinging to the hope that someone had a plan. At the front, Emily Harper, the county's emergency director, stood before a projected map, her voice steady but strained. A no-nonsense woman in her 40s, Emily had a reputation for getting things done, but even she looked rattled. "We're cut off," she said, pointing to the map. "Highway 41 is underwater at the north end. The eastern road's blocked by a downed power line and a collapsed bridge. The southern road's buried under a mudslide. We've got no way in or out." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The Corps of Engineers says it'll take at least 2 days to clear the highway for heavy vehicles. We don't have 2 days. The crowd erupted. 2 days, a man shouted from the front. "The hospital's generator won't last that long." A woman's voice cracked with panic. "My mother needs her meds now, not in 2 days." Emily raised her hands, trying to restore order. "We're exploring every option," she said, "but the terrain's too soft for emergency vehicles, and every mapped road is compromised." Sam listened, his eyes flicking between the map and the faces around him. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, jotting down precise notes with a stubby pencil. The map showed every road Emily mentioned, But Sam's gaze lingered on a faint line cutting through his property, a service trail, barely visible, that wound through his western field. It was high ground, built on clay-heavy soil that could hold the weight of a truck even in this mess. He'd walked that trail 1,000 times, knew every dip and rise like the back of his hand. When the discussion turned to fuel shortages, Sam raised his hand, a gesture so subtle it nearly went unnoticed. Emily caught it, nodding. "Yes, sir? You have an idea?" The room turned, surprised to see the old farmer step forward. Sam cleared his throat, his voice low and gravelly, unused to addressing a crowd. "There's a service trail on my west field," he said. "High ground, solid clay base. It'll hold heavy trucks if you need a way through." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that carries judgment. A younger county official, Ryan Baxter, leaned toward Emily, his voice dripping with condescension. "Appreciate the thought, Mr. Tucker, but this is a logistics issue. We've got experts handling it." A snicker came from the front row, sharp and cutting. "He's just a farmer," a man muttered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. What's he know about emergency routes? Laughter rippled through the gym, quickly stifled but impossible to ignore. It was the kind of laugh that dismissed a man's worth, that assumed his calloused hands and weathered face meant he had nothing to offer. Sam's expression didn't change. He nodded once, closed his notebook, and tucked it back into his pocket. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his boots leaving faint mud prints on the polished floor. The door closed softly behind him, but the sting of the room's dismissal lingered in the air. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the sky remained heavy, pressing down on Willow Creek like a warning. Sam climbed into his truck, his jaw tight, not from anger, but from resolve. He'd offered what he knew, and they'd laughed. Fine, he'd do what needed doing. Back at his farmhouse, Sam didn't head inside. Instead, he drove past the house, his truck rumbling along the gravel drive to a rusted gate at the edge of his property. He got out, unlocked the padlock, and swung the gate open, its hinges groaning from years of neglect. Back in the cab, he followed a faint dirt track through his soybean fields, stopping where the trail opened into a wider stretch of uncultivated land. From the glove compartment, he pulled a laminated map, not some GPS printout, but an old topographic chart, its edges worn, marked with handwritten notes from decades past. Sam studied it, his pencil making new marks as he accounted for the storm's impact on the terrain. The trail was still viable, he knew it, and he'd make sure it was ready. Meanwhile, in town, the situation worsened. Emily's team tried a detour through logging roads east of the county line, but the first fuel truck got stuck in mud so thick it might as well have been quicksand. A second attempt hit a washed-out culvert no one had accounted for. By dusk, Emily sat in the emergency operations center, staring at a whiteboard filled with crossed-out plans. Her phone call to the State Emergency Management Agency yielded little hope, just a promise to escalate the issue. The clock ticked past 6 p.m., and Willow Creek's lifeline was fading fast. Sam Tucker, alone in his fields, didn't know about the failed detours or the frantic calls. He didn't need to. He'd seen the map, heard the desperation in the gym, and knew what was at stake. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his land, Sam walked the trail one last time, his flashlight cutting through the dusk. The path was clear, the ground firm. It would hold. He returned to his truck, satisfied, and drove back to his farmhouse, ready to wait. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need applause. What he needed, what Willow Creek needed, was a way through. And Sam Tucker was damn sure he'd given them one. The night settled over Willow Creek like a heavy shroud, the kind that smothered hope as easily as it blocked out the stars. The storm had eased, but its scars remained. Flooded homes, shattered windows, and a town teetering on the edge of despair. In the Emergency Operations Center, Emily Harper's voice cracked as she hung up the phone, her last call to the State Emergency Management Agency yielding nothing but vague promises. The hospital's generator was down to fumes. The nursing home's medication supplies were critical, and the radio buzzed with the faint, desperate pleas of families stranded in outlying farms. Every plan had failed. The logging roads were a muddy graveyard for trucks, and the county's last hope, a makeshift bridge over the eastern creek, had collapsed under the weight of a single ambulance. Emily buried her face in her hands, the weight of lives slipping through her fingers. "We're out of time," she whispered to no one. Miles away, Samuel Sam Tucker stood alone in the darkness of his soybean fields, his flashlight carving a thin path through the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the scent of wet earth and broken branches. Sam's boots sank slightly into the clay-heavy soil as he walked his service trail, the one he'd offered at the meeting, the one they'd laughed off. He didn't care about the laughter. Not really. What gnawed at him was the thought of ventilators shutting down, of grandmothers waiting for pills that wouldn't come, of kids huddling in cold basements. Sam had seen too much in his 68 years to let pride get in the way of duty. He knelt, pressing a hand to the ground, feeling the firmness of the clay. It would hold. It had to. From his truck, Sam retrieved an old topographic map, its edges frayed from years of use. It wasn't some shiny GPS printout. It was a military-grade chart marked with pencil scratches from a life he'd left behind. Sam's eyes, sharp despite his age, traced the contours of his land, noting where the storm had shifted the terrain. He marked new hazards, a fallen oak here, a soft patch there, his pencil moving with the precision of a surgeon. This trail, winding through his western field, was no accident. Decades ago, he'd chosen this land for its subtle elevation, its compact soil, knowing it could serve as more than a farmer's path. It was a lifeline, built for a day like this. Sam folded the map, tucked it into his jacket, and headed back to his farmhouse, his heart heavy but resolute. He'd done what he could. Now, it was up to fate or something stronger. At 9:47 p.m., headlights pierced the darkness at the edge of Sam's property, their beams slicing through the mist like knives. Sam, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, squinted through the curtains. A black SUV led a convoy of 4 Humvees, their tires crunching gravel as they rolled to a stop. The vehicles bore no civilian markings, only the stark insignia of military command. Sam's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from a flicker of recognition. He knew that kind of convoy. He'd led ones like it long ago, in places where the stakes were measured in blood, not just rain. A crisp knock sounded at the door. Sam opened it to find a young officer, a major by his insignia, standing ramrod straight. "Mr. Tucker," the man said, his voice formal but warm. "It's been a long time, sir." Sam's eyes narrowed, searching the officer's face. "You're Jack Carter's boy, aren't you?" "Daniel," the major smiled, a flicker of pride breaking through his military bearing. "Major Carter now, sir, but yeah, Dad always talked about you." Sam nodded, a ghost of a memory stirring. Jack Carter, a young sergeant who'd followed him through hell and back. "What brings you out here, son?" Sam asked, though he already suspected the answer. Before the major could respond, the SUV's door opened, and a figure stepped out, his silhouette commanding even in the dim light. General William Bill Ramsey, 4 stars gleaming on his shoulders, strode forward, his uniform pristine despite the mud and chaos of the night. The air seemed to shift, as if the storm itself paused to acknowledge him. Without a word, he raised his hand in a salute, sharp and deliberate, his eyes locked on Sam. "Colonel Tucker," he said, his voice carrying the weight of respect earned in battle. They didn't know who they were dismissing. Sam returned the salute, his movements instinctive, though his hands hadn't formed that gesture in decades. "Didn't expect him to, General," he said quietly. "It's been 30 years. Ramsey's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "Not long enough to forget the man who got us through the Kabul supply crisis, or the one who wrote the book on moving convoys through impossible terrain." Sam's expression stayed neutral, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of pain, of memories he'd buried under the soil of his farm. "You didn't come all this way for a history lesson," he said. Ramsey shook his head. "Emily Harper called us in a panic. Mentioned a farmer named Sam Tucker who suggested a route no one else saw. I knew it had to be you." The truth spilled out then, not with fanfare, but with the quiet force of revelation. Sam Tucker wasn't just a farmer. He was Colonel Samuel Tucker, retired, the architect of Operation Desert Pulse's emergency logistics, the man who'd mapped supply routes through war zones while bullets flew. His manual on rapid response transport was still required reading at West Point, but here in Willow Creek, he was just Sam. the widower, the soybean grower, the man they'd laughed out of the gym. Sam didn't dwell on it. There was no time. He grabbed his flashlight and led the convoy to the western field, his steps sure despite the darkness. "Trail starts here," he said, pointing to the gate he'd unlocked earlier. "High ground, clay base, wide enough for 2 trucks to pass. Drainage slopes west so it's dry. Rest points every quarter mile, shielded by tree lines." General Ramsey watched, his eyes gleaming with recognition. "Oh, GPS," he muttered to Major Curdle, "just the land and his head." Carter nodded, his voice low. "Dad said Colonel Tucker could map a route faster than any computer. Saved our asses in 93? Sam walked ahead, his flashlight sweeping the path, pointing out a low ditch to avoid, a curve to take slow. The Humvees followed, their engines growling as they navigated the trail. It was perfect, every inch designed with a soldier's precision, every detail accounted for. The elevation kept the water at bay, the width allowed for smooth passage. The natural windbreaks offered cover for drivers to rest. Sam didn't need to explain it. The trail spoke for itself, a testament to a mind that saw solutions where others saw only chaos. By dawn, the impossible had happened. The first fuel truck rolled into Willow Creek's town square, its tank full, its driver guided by Sam's trail. Behind it came medical vans loaded with insulin, oxygen, and hope. National Guard soldiers poured out, distributing supplies as residents emerged from their homes, tears streaming down their faces. A mother clutched her diabetic son, sobbing as a medic handed her a vial of insulin. An old man, oxygen mask strapped to his face, gripped a soldier's hand, whispering, "Thank you." The town, on the brink of collapse, was breathing again. Word spread like wildfire. The route had come from Sam Tucker's field, from the man they'd mocked. Whispers turned to stories. Hadn't someone seen a general salute him? Wasn't he more than just a farmer? Emily Harper, her eyes red from exhaustion and guilt, stood in the square watching the convoy. She'd dismissed him, let the room laugh him out. Now she saw the truth. Sam Tucker had saved them all. As the sun rose, General Ramsey stood with Sam at the edge of the field, watching the trucks roll through. "You couldn't let 'em figure it out," Ramsey said. "After what they said." Sam shook his head, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Wasn't about them, Bill. It was about the kid who needs his medicine, the old folks who can't wait. Clara taught me that. Help where you can, no matter what." His voice broke on his wife's name, and for a moment the weight of his loss, his solitude, hung between them. Ramsey placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're still the best damn officer I ever served with." Sam turned away, his eyes on the horizon where the storm clouds were finally breaking. He didn't need the praise. He didn't need the town to know who he was. But as the convoy moved through his trail, saving lives with every mile, Sam Tucker felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. And somewhere, he knew Clara was watching, her smile as bright as the dawn. The morning sun broke over Willow Creek, casting golden rays across a town reborn from the ashes of despair. The air buzzed with the hum of diesel engines as National Guard trucks rolled through Sam Tucker's trail, now a lifeline etched into the earth. Families lined the streets, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief as medics delivered oxygen tanks and insulin, as generators roared back to life, warming homes that had been cold for days. Children clutched their parents' hands, pointing at the soldiers who seemed to have appeared from nowhere, like angels sent to answer prayers. But the whispers spreading through the crowd told a different story, not of divine intervention, but of a man in a faded denim jacket, a man they'd laughed out of the high school gym. Sam Tucker, the farmer, had become something else entirely, a savior. By noon, the town square was a hive of activity. News vans from Nashville parked along Main Street, their cameras trained on the convoy, their reporters scrambling for a story that was already slipping into legend. "Who opened the route?" one reporter demanded, shoving a microphone at Deputy Sheriff Jake Malone. The deputy, his uniform still damp from a night of hauling debris, pointed west. "Sam Tucker's field," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Some old trail on his land. General Ramsey called it a damn miracle. The reporter's eyes widened. "General Ramsey? As in Joint Chiefs Ramsey?" Jake nodded, too tired to elaborate. But the seed was planted, and the story of Sam Tucker began to grow. twisting through Willow Creek like the roots of the maples that had fallen in the storm. In the Emergency Operations Center, Emily Harper sat at a folding table staring at a crumpled map marked with Sam's trail. Guilt gnawed at her, sharp and unrelenting. She'd let Ryan Baxter dismiss him, let the crowd's laughter drive him out. Now the truth was undeniable. Sam Tucker wasn't just a farmer. He was a man who'd seen wars, mapped battlefields, and saved lives when the world was falling apart. Emily's hands trembled as she dialed the governor's office, her voice breaking as she explained how a 68-year-old widower had outsmarted their best plans. "We need to honor him," she said. "This town owes him everything." Sam, meanwhile, was back at his farmhouse, his boots still muddy, his hands busy mending a fence post that had loosened in the storm. He didn't know about the news vans or the whispers. He didn't care. The trail was open, the trucks were moving, and that was enough. But as he hammered a nail into the wood, a black SUV rolled up his drive, followed by a state police escort. Sam straightened, wiping sweat from his brow as Governor Laura Bennett stepped out, her polished heels sinking slightly into the gravel. She was a woman of presence, her sharp suit and steady gaze commanding attention, but her smile was warm, almost reverent as she approached. "Mr. Tucker," she said, extending a hand, "I'm here to thank you on behalf of Tennessee." Sam shook her hand, his grip firm but unassuming. "No need for that, ma'am," he said, his voice low. "Just did what needed doing." The governor's eyes softened, but she pressed on. "Your route saved lives. We're making it permanent, an emergency access road, and we're naming it Tucker's Way." She pulled a folded certificate from her aide, a commendation for extraordinary service. "This is the least we can do." Sam looked at the paper, his expression unreadable. For a moment he saw Clara's face in his mind, her gentle smile, her voice urging him to help, always to help. "Pave it right," he said, finally handing the certificate back, "and put up a sign. Someone else might need it someday." The governor nodded, understanding the weight of his words. As she turned to leave, she paused. "You're a rare man, Sam Tucker. The world could use more like you." The news of the commendation spread faster than the storm itself. By evening, Willow Creek was abuzz with stories, some true, some embellished. Sam Tucker was a war hero, they said, a secret operative who'd saved generals in deserts far away, a man who'd written the book on survival, then walked away to grow soybeans. The truth, as always, was simpler and deeper. Sam was a man who'd served, lost, and kept going, his strength forged in silence, his legacy written in the dirt of his fields. But Sam wanted none of it. When a reporter from Channel 5 knocked on his door, her camera crew in tow, he waved her off. "Road's open," he said, his voice firm but kind. "That's the story." The reporter persisted, her question sharp. "People say you're a hero, Mr. Tucker. Don't you want to set the record straight?" Sam's eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "Heroes don't need microphones," he said, and closed the door. Days turned to weeks, and Tucker's Way became more than a road. It was a symbol, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or stars. The state brought in engineers to reinforce the trail with gravel and portable bridges, ensuring it would stand against future storms. At the dedication ceremony, a small crowd gathered, including Ryan Baxter, the official who dismissed Sam. He took the podium, his face flushed with shame. "I was wrong," he said, his voice shaking. "I saw a farmer, not a leader. Sam Tucker taught us what courage looks like." The crowd applauded, but Sam, standing at the edge, only nodded, uncomfortable with the spotlight. He'd come only because his neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, had practically dragged him there. Life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal. Power lines hummed again, roads reopened, and the scars of the storm began to fade. But something had changed. Sam's quiet routine, tending his fields, fixing his fences, took on a new rhythm. Young National Guard officers started showing up at his gate, notepads in hand, asking to walk the trail with him. They listened as he explained the land's secrets, how to read elevation, how to spot weak soil, how to plan when the world was falling apart. "It's not about maps," he'd tell them, his voice steady. "It's about knowing what's under your feet." One crisp fall afternoon, a year after the storm, a bus pulled up to Sam's property. 20 cadets from the Tennessee Military Academy stepped out. their uniforms crisp, their eyes wide with awe. Their instructor, a grizzled veteran named Captain Hayes, gestured to the trail. "This," he said, "is where you learn what leadership really means. Not from a textbook, but from a man who lived it." He held up a dog-eared manual, its pages worn from use. "Colonel Samuel Tucker wrote this, still the gold standard for crisis logistics, and he's right here, walking these fields." Sam watched from his porch, his coffee mug warm in his hands. He didn't join them, didn't need to. His work was done. But as the cadets walked Tucker's way, their voices hushed with respect, Sam felt a stir of something he hadn't felt since Clara's passing. Connection. Not to fame, not to glory, but to a purpose larger than himself. He thought of the hospital patients breathing easier, the families reunited, the town that stood because he'd refused to stay silent. As dusk fell, a single cadet lingered. A young woman with sharp eyes and a notebook full of questions. She approached Sam, hesitant. "Sir," she said, "why didn't you tell him who you were, at the meeting, I mean?" Sam looked out over his fields, the last light catching the sign that read Tucker's Way. "Didn't need to," he said softly. "The road spoke for me." The cadet nodded, her eyes glistening. "My brother was in the hospital that night. He got his insulin because of you." Sam's throat tightened, and he looked away, the weight of her words settling deep. "Just doing my job, kid," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying the emotion he'd buried for years. The cadet saluted and rejoined her group, leaving Sam alone with the fading light. He sat in his old rocking chair, the one Clara used to love, and stared at the horizon. The storm was gone, but another was always coming. Maybe not rain, maybe not wind, but something. And when it did, Tucker's Way would be ready, somewhere out there. Clara was watching, her smile as steady as the ground beneath his feet. But as the stars began to appear, a faint rumble echoed in the distance. Not thunder, but something mechanical, something unfamiliar. Sam's eyes narrowed, his soldier's instinct stirring. Whatever it was, he'd face it. He always did.